All right, we are live. Today, Lloyd and I are going to be continuing our series that we call Islam's Apologetics, exposing the many lies that Muslims tell in an attempt to defend their religion. Today, we are going to be a brief introduction to the subject of jihad, and then we're going to throw it open to questions. Before we get started, let me open with a word of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for this time together. We thank you for the technology that allows us to reach around the world, reach people that otherwise we could never reach. We thank you that we are alive at this very exciting time where more Muslims are converting to Christianity than at any other point in human history. We ask that any Muslims listening today approach the subject with an open mind and open heart and not just reject everything we're saying because they don't want to believe it. In Jesus' name we pray, amen.
Amen.
So as many of you know, this is about the seventh or so video in this series. A lot of them we have done with Sonia. She is unable to join us. She is dealing with some substantial personal issues right now. Without going into too many details, I just ask that you pray for her and her situation. Lloyd, why don't you go ahead and give a brief introduction to yourself?
Hi, everyone. Name's Lloyd, South African, based in Warsaw, Poland. Spent 11 years in the Middle East, worked in national defense, national security, worked on very large projects to protect borders from incursion, protect critical national infrastructure from incursion, sabotage, and so on. In the time that I spent there, I was really intrigued by the culture, spent time learning as much as I could, and I started to educate myself to understand just the strangeness of the Islamic culture, started digging deeply into the Sharia, and started to understand how the culture fit together. And it was when I was doing counterterrorism studies, when I was doing some counterterrorism studies that I really started to understand and saw the influence and just the way that people were afraid of discussing Islam, and I decided to speak out. So now I discuss the major Islamic Sharia sources. I go through the Sirah, I go through the Tafsir, and most especially I discuss the Sharia law, which is huge. For instance, the Quran is 150,000 words, the bulk of which is abrogated, but a typical Sharia manual is over 1,000 pages. A simple volume, for instance, a summarized volume is over 1,000 pages. A typical Sharia manual set would be 2,600 pages. So there's a great deal there which explains things that the Quran simply alludes to, but you can get excruciating detail from Sharia manuals.
Excellent, thank you. So my name is Thaddeus. I am a Christian who's been doing Christian apologetics for around 20 years, just informally, not like, as a ministry or anything, but just on a personal level to talk to people in real life. About a year ago, I was encouraged to start a channel on YouTube by Islam Critiqued. And about 2 years ago, I started getting into studying Islam. So my channel looks at both Christian issues and issues related to Islam. A little while ago, Lloyd started posting on my channel. I was very impressed with his work, so I invited him to join me, and he is a wealth of knowledge, as we have been learning. He is addressing Islam at a far deeper level than most critics are. So, as I said briefly when we got started, we're going to have an introduction to jihad. We'll just introduce the subject today, briefly go over it, and then we'll do a deeper dive into the subject at a later time. And then we thought it would be good to have some time for Q&A, since we've been doing a number of these, and now seemed like a good time to just do one for Q&A. So if you're ready, we can start with the presentation first.
Yeah, please post your questions. We'd like to work through those as we go and take the time to actually just address you guys in this session. So let me share the screen. Host disable participant screen sharing.
Okay. I thought I had re-enabled that, but there you go. Now you can share.
So depending on how it goes, I've only got 13 slides prepared, although I do have additional backup material ready and waiting. So it depends how it goes. I can either do more slides or I can do other material. So yeah, let me start. Okay, screen 2 would be that one. All right, has the slide popped up?
Yes, it has.
Okay, so we will not be discussing this book today. I won't be going through this, but this book is called The Religious and Moral Doctrine of Jihad. It is written by the Sheikh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah. Now, Sheikh al-Islam is an honorific, it is a title given to major scholars of Islam who wrote incredibly important works, fatwa, that became binding, that were made part of the Sharia, that became binding laws of Islam, part of the ijma, the consensus, the major source of Islamic law. We will, as we go forward, we will discover that the Sharia and all of the major texts written by the scholars aligns perfectly with what you're going to see in his book. So that, for instance, Muslims will claim that ISIS has nothing to do with Islam and that ISIS is twisting the text. Well, we're going to see that ISIS is applying 100% accurate, fully authentic Sunni Sharia. So yeah, let's, if you have questions, do post them. Let's skip forward.
Maybe before we get started, Betsy posted a fun little question. She says, Lloyd, why are you always dissing Islam? Are you saying it isn't the truth?
Look, if you, you know my thoughts on Islam, Betsy, don't make me go there, please, please, please. I have seen more of the Middle East than anyone I know, okay? I spent a lot of time there. People used to pay me very well to make sure that crazy jihadis didn't blow things up and kill people. So yeah, I know what I'm talking about. It's insane. It's nuts. And today we're going to start seeing how in Islam, the violence starts at home. Just like in Christianity, we say charity starts at home. Well, in Islam, violence starts at home. So this book, which we'll come to in the next episode, but I will do some work prior to that. The full title of the book is Governance According to Allah's Law, the Sharia, in reforming the ruler and his flock. In other words, it is about how to apply Sharia law with regards to jihad accurately within the Ummah and within the Caliphate. So we will start looking at the Sharia before we start looking at his book, and we will see if the two align, and we will discover that they align perfectly. Of course, a Sheikh al-Islam is an outstanding scholar of the Islamic sciences. Sciences, right. And it was a title given to jurists whose fatwas were particularly influential. In this case, there are something like Wikipedia lists 24 Sheikh al-Islam. So through the entire 1,400 years of Islam, there are 24 of these men who are regarded as the finest scholars of Islam. There are many others with very high degrees of reverence, but Sheikh al-Islam is only given to about 24 of them, and Ibn Taymiyyah is one of them. Now, we are often given quotes with no context to defend Islam and to defend jihad, because they want us to believe in the colloquial sense that jihad simply means struggle. And yes, that is correct. It simply means to struggle. However, just like the word light in English could mean something that doesn't weigh a great deal, could also mean to light a fire, to burn down someone's house. Something that is light could also mean a light that is shining. So a word can have multiple meanings in multiple contexts. So a good friend of ours, a guy called Mohammed Amin, sent me this when I asked him about the definition of jihad. In fact, he sent me a Facebook friend request today. Thanks, Amin. Anyhow, Ibn Taymiyyah says in the Kitab al-Nubuwat, okay, in volume 1, page 570, as for the oppressor who does not fight, so we are oppressors, then there are no texts in which Allah commands him to be fought. Rather, the unbelievers are only fought on the condition that they wage war, as is practiced by the majority of scholars and as is evident in the book and Sunnah, in the Quran and Sunnah. This is a quote with no context, no proper context. We will eventually, this is by Ibn Taymiyyah, and we're going to study Ibn Taymiyyah's book, and we're going to see if this really is what he says and thinks, because we'll discover, no, it's not. This is a common quote used by Islamic apologists to lie about the true definition of jihad. Jihad is a legal term. It is defined in the Sharia. And if you do see it, ask for the book that this is in. I couldn't find a copy of this Kitab al-Nubuwwat. I could not find a copy. I tried. Believe me, I tried. I could find scant reference to it anywhere on the web. We also have a group called the Yaqeen Institute, always dishonest, that uses the same quote. And we'll have a look at them in a moment. And later on, we will actually start to have a quick look at Ibn Taymiyyah's book. Let's have a look at the Yaqeen Institute propaganda. They seem to provide lots of propaganda which is used by Islamic apologists. So this is written by a man called Justin Parrott, a convert based in Abu Dhabi. Jihad as defense, just war theory in the Quran and Sunnah. So he's using the term just war, which is actually a Christian term, which was used by the popes in terms of the Crusades. So the mainstream view of jihad in Islam is consistent with the modern international norms of non-violence. The correct scientific term for that is lies. The Quran and Sunnah permit Muslims to defend themselves from aggression while also limiting warfare to the purpose of preserving security, freedom, and human rights. In one sense, that is correct because all people have the right of self-defense. However, Islam also reserves for itself the right of offense, attack, and killing, subjugating, enslaving, extorting, and otherwise ruling over, domineering, invading the countries and the lands belonging to non-Muslims to impose Islam upon them. Any comments from you so far, Thaddeus?
Well, I do want to say one thing, that quote, whether it is real or not, and you haven't been able to verify it's real, I wouldn't be surprised if it's fake, because there are lots of fake quotes going around on the internet that supposedly were said by Muhammad, and they'll put like Prophet Muhammad, Sahih Bukhari, and that's all they'll put. And then it's like, that's not in Sahih Bukhari anywhere.
Yeah, correct.
And his famous last sermon, there is a last sermon, but the version circulated on the internet was made up in like 1989 or something. That like traces is back to a book published in India in 1989, or don't quote me on the year, but around that time period. And it has no actual basis in fact.
Yeah, man, I don't know how anyone can believe Islam's texts. I mean, as far as I can tell, Islam is a weak hadith. You know, the Quran is a weak hadith.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, so according to classical jurist Ibn Taymiyyah, died 1328, jihad is a response to military aggression and not merely religious difference. We're going to prove otherwise from Ibn Taymiyyah. There is no evidence in the source text of Islam that permit Muslims to attack or kill civilians or invade non-hostile nations. We will prove the opposite from Ibn Taymiyyah. He asserts that this was the view of the majority of Muslim scholars. Ibn Taymiyyah will prove this wrong. This is going to be fun. Yeah. So look, just so you know, I'm going to call Justin Parrott a liar. Yeah, he is. So he's wrong. Indeed, the following verse after 2:190 makes clear that warfare in Islam is only a reaction to violent provocation. If the aggressors give up their fight, then there's no just cause for war. This guy's clearly never read the Sharia. Fight them until there's no more persecution and worship is devoted to Allah. If they cease hostilities, there can be no further hostility except towards aggressors. Well, there are many, many other verses that say other things. So grabbing one out of context or grabbing one that suits your context, that's easy. And it speaks of, according to Ibn Hajar, scholars such as this guy, whose name I can't pronounce, consider the obligation of jihad as a means to this end and not an end in itself. If Islam and Muslims can be protected without resort to warfare, the way of non-violence is given preference. That is a lie. We will discuss the obligation of jihad. We will have a look at this. So this is Justin Parrott here. He has a MRes, whatever that is, in Islamic Studies from the University of Wales, and he is research librarian for Middle East Studies at New York University in Abu Dhabi. A friend of mine used to study there. He used to teach psychology and sociology. So he served as a volunteer imam for the Islamic Society of Greater Columbus until 2013, and he's currently the imam for the Muslim Students Association of New York University, Abu Dhabi. So we'd like to think he knows what he's talking about. So those who imagine an aggressive, expansionist Islam are unable to convincingly explain away these texts. Well, these are all non-binding fatwa that he references in his article, and we're going to convincingly explain them away and prove this man to be either an ignorant dupe or a consistent liar. So the standard response is to resort to the doctrine of abrogation or nask, in which it is claimed these sword verses cancel everything we've cited to this point. And we know that in fact they do. We've done a show on nask. What do you say to this, Thaddeus?
Yeah, I'm curious as to how he's going to approach this. I guess he's right, because I'm not imagining an aggressive expansionist Islam. I know that is
Yeah,
the original Islamist.
Yeah, we're not going to do this article, though. We're going to stop here at this point. That's enough. People can read this article for themselves and laugh at it. But yeah, many classical jurists rejected this view, including this guy who no one's ever heard of and no one cares about, Al-Jawzi, yeah, whoever that is, and Al-Suyuti. And he's going to misquote these guys as well. So let's move forward. So let's have a look at the greatest, the single greatest, most respected and revered historian in Islam. So Ibn Khaldun he was born in 1332 and died in 1406. So he is the greatest Arab historian, and he developed one of the earliest philosophies of history. So it is contained in his masterpiece, the Muqaddimah, or the Introduction to History. He also wrote a definitive history of Muslim North Africa. Now, his family had a very high rank, which enabled him to study with the best teachers in North Africa. He received a classical Islamic education. He studied the Quran. He became a Hafiz. He memorized by heart, in other words. He also studied Arabic linguistics, the basis for understanding the Quran. He also became a scholar of the Hadith, the Sharia, as well as jurisprudence, so law and jurisprudence. And he received certification or an ijazah for all of those subjects. He was an extremely well-educated Islamic scholar. Let's see what this man has to say. This man founded the discipline of sociology. He actually founded the discipline that we today call sociology. So he says here, Ibn Khaldun, Islam's greatest historian, says, in the Muslim community, the holy war is a religious duty because of the universalism of the Muslim mission and the obligation to convert everybody to Islam, either by persuasion or by force. Therefore, caliphate and royal authority are united in Islam. In other words, there is no separation between church and state. So the person in charge can devote the available strength, that is all the strength of the ummah, to both of those at the same time, to both politics as well as religion. So in other words, warfare and religion. The other religious groups did not have a universal mission, and holy war was not a religious duty to them, save only for purposes of defense. It has thus come about that the person in charge of religious affairs in other religious groups is not concerned with power politics at all. Royal authority has nothing to do with religion. So it says that those who receive royal authority have it by accident, and that their power has nothing to do with religion, because we have separation of church and state. Islam has no separation of mosque and state. It comes to them as the necessary result of group feeling. People want a leader, in other words, which by its nature seeks to obtain royal authority, as we have mentioned before, and not because the other religions are under obligation to gain power over other nations, as is the case with Islam. They are merely required to establish their religion among their own people. Any comments so far?
Yeah, I think that, we pretty much agree with all this, that one tactic that apologists today like to take is say that Christianity is equally violent as Islam. But I mean, here we got the classic scholar, he's telling us straight up, and he's saying it's a weakness. He's saying, part of our religion is subjugating other people. You guys are you don't have any legitimate authority because you're not doing that as part of your religion.
Yeah,
I don't know if
crazy.
you hear my phone ring, so sorry if that came
Yeah.
through.
Yeah, no worries.
Yeah, but just earlier, last week, in response to my last video, our good friend, inspired by Sheikh Ahmed Didat, was disputing that Muslims had killed anyone in the name of Islam. He's like, it's the Christians who kill people in the name of Christianity. So then we cited 12 or 20 sources of documenting separate incidences of Muslims killing people, and he couldn't come up with any for Christians doing the same. And he's like, your sources are all made up. You're just lying and trying to deceive people. It's like, well, give us your sources.
Yeah. Now, if they would show us, in fact, you see supposed Christians and others coming to the comments who I believe they're Muslims, pretending to be non-Muslims. Give us the name of the Sharia manual, which mentions jihad and describes it in detail in Christianity. Which book is it? Who wrote it? Which page is it on? Please, would love to see it. You know, they say, yeah, well, Christianity says sell your clothes and buy a sword. Um, you know, you guys didn't consult the scholars, did you? Always tell us check with the scholars. What do the Christian scholars say about that? You might discover it doesn't say what you think it says. So, yeah, so this I think is pretty blunt. So either this man, who was one of the top scholars of Islam of that time, of the 13th century, it didn't know what he was talking about, or he's dead on accurate, and he's accurate, he's correct. This is Ibn Khaldun, and this is the man who invented modern history, from Reagan to Zuckerberg, the enduring relevance of a 14th century Arab historian. Clearly, he was nobody.
Clearly.
So let's look at the Muqaddimah. Sorry, yeah?
I just because he had no clue.
Yeah, he had no clue, exactly. Let's look at Islamic war by sea. So the royal and governmental authority of the Arabs became firmly established and powerful. The non-Arab nations became servants of the Arabs and were under their control. Every craftsman offered them his best services. They employed seagoing nations for their maritime needs. Their own experience of the sea and of navigation grew, and they turned out to be expert. They wished to wage the holy war by sea. They constructed ships and loaded the fleet with men and weapons. They embarked the army and fighters to fight against the unbelievers across the sea. So they crossed the sea to take the fight to people who weren't fighting them. Am I reading this correct?
Yeah, I think so. You know, I'd like to see how that was defensive, but you know.
Yeah, this was the special concern of the provinces and border regions closest to Europe, right? The Caliph Abdul Malik recommended to blah, blah, blah that a shipyard be set up in Tunis for the production of maritime implements, as he desired waging the holy war. From there, the conquest of Sicily was achieved in the days of Ziyadat Allah. Sounds like aggression. Sounds like the Islamic wars of aggression to me. So let's have a look. Let's take a little bit of a detour. I'm on slide 7 of 14 here. So let's look at Islam, how it mandates violence and how it teaches violence and creates violence within its culture. Looking into another's house without permission. The Prophet Mohammed said, if a man looks at you without permission and you threw a rock at him and knocked out his eye, you would not have committed any offense. It's a religion of peace. I mean, that is.
Well, yeah, I guess. I mean, this is clearly defensive. I mean, if someone looks at you, they've already committed an offensive act. So it's clearly
defensive. Brick at them, knock out their eye, and then say, hey, I'm innocent. Right?
Yes.
Maybe there's a fine for the guy that looked at you as well. And 2, whoever peeps into a house without its people's leave, they may put out his eye. So you look in by their gate, they rush out, they grab you, they put out your eye, and that's okay.
Yep, pure defense. I don't know where you're getting anything aggressive out of this. I mean,
self-defense. Obviously, someone looked at your house. I mean, look, your house could, I don't know, fall down because some looks are very powerful, I guess. So. Maybe someone can explain it to me in the comments. But I think look, I mean, without joking, this is disgusting. I mean, this is disgusting. This is barbaric. This is Islam.
Oh, definitely. You know, in the Gospels, Jesus says, you've heard it said that if someone pokes out your eye, you can poke out theirs. But I say, don't do that, turn the other cheek. And here it's like Muhammad said, you've heard it said that if someone pokes your eye, you can poke them back. Well, don't wait for that step. Just go right when they look at you.
Yeah. Obviously, this book is The Reliance of the Traveler. This is a book that I've referenced in almost every single show that I've done. It is the most famous, the most popular Sharia manual in the world. It's also called the Umdat al-Salik, otherwise known as the Reliance of the Traveler. We will put links. All the other shows you'll find in the description. There will be links to all of this. You can download this. It's section P75.22. P75 or P section P is called enormities. In other words, major sins, major infractions, major infractions of the law. So it's a major infraction of the law, and thus you get punished like this. Let's have a look at excessiveness in religion. As you know, blasphemy is punishable by death in Islam. So let's have a look at their laws on excessiveness in religion. P75.23. Allah says, O people of the book, now this is Jews and Christians, do not be excessive in your religion. Quran 4:171. And Tafsir Qurtubi says, according to them, this refers to the extremism of the Jews concerning Jesus in accusing Mary of fornication. So Mary fornicated and had Jesus. And apparently the Jews accuse her of, okay, and the extremism of the Christians in considering Jesus a God. For both excessiveness and remissness are evil, and both may be unbelief. So Christianity is evil.
So basically anything that Islam disagrees with is excessiveness in some other religion.
Yeah. And of course we must be punished for this, but we'll get through all of this piece by piece. Let's have a look at this book, the Muqtasar al-Quduri. Lying to non-Muslims, cheating them, and backbiting them might become permissible in certain circumstances, as may killing them. I'm sure you feel really at ease right now because it's only in certain circumstances, and this is only whitewashed language to take away the sting of the actual translation, which I'm sure is much, much nastier. So the Muslim is not to lose, however, the Muslim is not to lose sight of Islamic injunctions in his or her dealings. One may not be nice to people at the expense of compromising Islamic principles. So in other words, generally don't lie to them, generally don't cheat them, generally don't kill them unless it suits Islamic principles, then go ahead.
And we've already seen some examples of what Islamic principles are. You know, if someone looks at you the wrong way, that is a substantial violation of Islamic law.
Yeah. This line just happened to come next, and I stuck this in. I've mentioned this before. The Prophet Muhammad said, even if Moses were alive on the earth today, Moses would have no option but to follow Muhammad. So yeah, just keep that in mind. Right, so now I want to talk about a little known aspect of jihad and where the culture of violence starts within Islamic culture and within Islamic family. They have a term called commanding the right and forbidding the wrong. Commanding the right means insisting on Sharia law as the only right way to go. Forbidding the wrong means preventing people from straying. In other words, enforcing Sharia law. And of course, the means of doing so is jihad. For instance, we are not worshiping Allah. We don't worship Muhammad, actually. Let's just be honest. And thus, jihad must be fought against us because we are doing the wrong, and they have to forbid the wrong. So let's look at section Q 1.0 in the Reliance of the Traveler, the obligation to command the right. So now the Yaqeen Institute article, so used to confuse those two words, stated that there is no obligation. Well, let's have a look at that. Q 1.1, Allah says, let there be a group of you commanding the right and forbidding the wrong. Those are the successful, Quran 3:104. This verse explains that commanding the right and forbidding the wrong are a communal rather than a personal obligation. And that is discussed in section C 3.2. I'll do that later on. For he says, let there be a group of you and not all of you command the right. In other words, that small minority that is always committing violence to enforce Islamic law. If enough people do it, meaning that whenever a wrong is seen, one of those who sees it corrects it, the responsibility is lifted from the rest. Those who perform it being expressly mentioned as the successful, they will get extra blessings, of course, with Allah. There are many verses in the Quran about commanding the right and forbidding the wrong. So now let's have a look at the jihad law in the Sharia. So now let's compare this, commanding the right and forbidding the wrong. This is a social contract, section Q. Now let's look at section O, which speaks about jihad. And jihad is warfare against non-Muslims to enforce Islam. Let's have a look. the obligatory character of jihad. Jihad is a communal obligation, defined in section 3.2 as well. When enough people perform jihad to successfully accomplish it, it is no longer obligatory upon others. The evidence for which is the Prophet saying, "He who provides the equipment for a soldier in jihad has himself performed jihad." And if none of those concerned perform jihad and it does not happen, then everyone in Islam who is aware that it is obligatory is guilty of sin. The entire ummah falls into sin. So jihad was a communal obligation after the emigration, the hijrah to Medina. And as for subsequent times, that is today, there are two possible states in respect to non-Muslims. And let's have a look if this complies with what Muqaddimah showed us earlier under Ibn Khaldun. The first is when they, that's us, are in our own countries, in which case jihad is a communal obligation. And this is what our author is speaking of when he says jihad is a communal obligation upon the Muslims each year. They have to attack us in our own countries.
Mm-hmm. So the dishonest Muslim can legitimately say that it's not obligatory for people to go out and fight, and leave out the part about it, only if others are already doing that fighting and you're providing for them financially.
Yes. Yeah, it's compulsory that rich Muslims must provide funding for jihad. That is true. In fact, 1/8 of the zakat has to go to jihad. So in the Sharia, what we learn is that talk is weak and violence is holy. So whoever of you sees something wrong, let him change it with his hand. So there are multiple levels of how to enforce the right and forbid the wrong. The first is to do so with your hand. Now, what do you do with your hands? Well, you stab people, you shoot people, you strangle them, you beat them, you hit them with a stick. If unable to, then let him change it with his tongue. We see that on YouTube. If unable to, then with his heart. And if you fight with your heart, that is the weakest degree of faith, you weakling.
You'd think it'd be the other way around, you know? First try to convince them with your actions, and then with your words, and then last of all with force if necessary. But no, it's the other way around. Go to force first, and only if you're, you know, you're physically weak or something, then use your words.
Yeah, bark. First bite and then bark. That's interesting. It's like bang, bang, stop or I'll shoot. So while they've heard the message of Allah say, people who do not change something wrong when they see it are on the verge of a sweeping punishment from Allah. So when these Muslims go and they do violence, they are doing it because they are taught that if they see wrong, us non-Muslims, so even Muslims breaking the law, they have to do it or they will be punished by Allah. They're afraid of going to hell. They feel that they are doing righteousness. And oddly enough, if you look at the words of Jesus in the New Testament, he says there will come a day when people will do evil and call it good. And I believe this is what he was referring to.
Yeah, I think so. When you study Islam, like not the popular version, but like the real true Islam from the early days of Islam to the present in most of the majority Muslim world, you get, and you know the gospel and you know the words of Jesus and you know the book of Revelation as background, it's really hard not to see Islam as being at least one piece of the false prophets and the false teachers that will come and try to take away Jesus's teachings.
I believe so. Go take the Quran says changing with the tongue apparently refers to taqiyya. Well, that may be true. That's a very good point, Go. Yep, that's a good point. I'll keep that in mind. That's a good point there. Yeah, because lying all the time. So let's see. Threaten them or hit them if you must. Quranic verses and hadiths all indicate that whoever sees something wrong and does nothing has sinned. So they must be. So anyway, so they mentioned that some say that they must be permission from the caliph, and then after they say no, that's just an opinion. That's an arbitrary opinion. So in other words, it's up to the individual Muslim. So one should realize there are 5 levels of censure: explaining the wrong nature of the act, admonishing the person politely, reviling him and harshness, and then forcibly stopping the act, such as by breaking musical instruments or by pouring out wine. And finally, intimidation and threatening to strike the person or actually hitting him to stop what he is doing. This is the Sharia. This is why Muslims are ashamed of ever quoting and discussing the Sharia. That's why they can't.
I mean, can you imagine the controversy if a Christian pastor said, guys, go into the bar and try to prevent people from drinking. And if you can't stop them with your words, then pour out their beers on the floor.
Worse
shove
than
them
that,
to the
they have to
ground if
break the
necessary.
bottles. It's a requirement. They have to smash the bottles. Yeah, and then beat up the patrons. Yeah. Yeah, imagine that. Imagine that. And this is standard, bog standard, common or God in Islam. It's disgusting. Let's have a look. So, the early Muslims' invariable practice of reprimanding those in authority decisively proves by their consensus that there is no need for a superior's authorization. In other words, it's up to the individual Muslim. He can decide to grab a knife and stick it in your throat because he doesn't like what you're doing. Now, if it be wondered whether a child is entitled to reprove his father, or a wife or husband, or for private citizens to reprove their ruler, the answer is that all are fundamentally entitled to. So if you gotta lay down the slap, it says apparently you can. If you gotta lay down the smackdown, go for it. It says here, kids, well, you gotta take down your dad, go for it. I don't know. How do you translate that? How do you read that? How do you interpret that?
Yeah, I mean, I can't see any other way to see it other than if your authority figures aren't telling you to do what needs to be done for Islam, then go ahead and take the law into your own hands and make it happen.
Yeah, I mean, this puts the funk into dysfunctional, for sure. So let's have a look. So this is mandatory behavior because this is in the Sharia. So when one knows, defining Q2.6, the wrong will be eliminated by speaking or acting without entailing problems for yourself, you are obliged to censure it. When you know that speaking will be ineffective and that you will be beaten if you do, then you're not obliged to. Then taqiyya comes into play, right? Because you are afraid. Hadiths that seem to show the non-obligatoriness of commanding the right and forbidding the wrong are understood by Islamic scholars as referring to specific situations in which censure is ineffectual, and they are not global statements about this obligation's inapplicability to a certain era of history, such as our own or some future time. So these statements are binding fatwa for all time, for all history. Commanding the right and forbidding the wrong will be obligatory until the day of judgment. So in Q2.7, it says, problems means being beaten or killed or robbed or acquiring a bad name in town. As for being reviled and disparaged, it is not an excuse to remain silent, for someone who commands what is right generally meets with it. Meet your YouTube Islamic troll here.
Yep, doesn't mind being called names and being shown to be a fool because he believes he's doing what's right.
I wouldn't call them idiots. I mean, first of all, they are idiots, but if they would just be honest.
Yeah, I mean, being uneducated or not thinking carefully through matters is one thing. Intentionally lying and avoiding questions and deceiving is quite another.
Yeah, yeah. So destruction of property is mandated. Second last slide. Righting the wrong by hand. Q5.6 in the Umdat al-Salik, or Reliance of the Traveler. The fifth degree consists of changing the blameworthy thing with one's hand, such as by breaking musical instruments or pouring out wine. Now notice it says here, break the bottles when pouring out wine. Smash the bottles. If you cannot manage except by throwing rocks at the bottles or the like, then do so, and you are not obliged to cover the damages.
I wonder why Muslims in the West aren't outside the bars throwing rocks at people. Guess
You have to wonder. They will. They do. There are instances of that. Look at this, for instance, on YouTube. France, Muslim smashes wine bottles because it is Ramadan. I watched this video. And he says he walks into this bottle store, starts to smash all the wine bottles, and he says there's no alcohol during Ramadan. And he starts smashing the wine bottles by hand. Now, where do you think he got this instruction? Do you think he doesn't read the Sharia? He does. He knows it. He was taught this.
Yeah, and he knew that the leaders of you said it was France, I believe, um, that they weren't going to stop the sale of alcohol, so it was up to him to do it himself.
Correct. Understand, this is what we're inviting. We're inviting in a culture that hates us. And this one is by Robert Spencer, of course, of Jihad Watch. Video from Germany. Muslim enters supermarkets, begins smashing bottles of alcohol. Where do you think he got that idea? Same thing. He knows the Sharia. He's read it. Every Muslim, I think, is... I was speaking with someone recently who mentioned that Muslims, there's an ex-Muslim, he mentioned on YouTube in a comment that Muslims know this stuff. They've been studying the Quran at madrasa. They know it. They know it way better than they let on. They just don't admit it. So, intimidating.
Yeah, I think that they don't let on and that they know because they don't want to talk about it. They don't want to reveal anything that can be used against them.
Yeah, and they don't want to give us the satisfaction of knowing the truth. And they lie. I mean, they understand, like Dita lied. You know, I mean, so the 6th degree is threatening and intimidation. The religion of peace, which teaches you to threaten and intimidate, such as by saying stop this or I will, and when possible, this should, not must, precede actually hitting the person. So it's recommended to say it, but if you really have to just go and hit them, then just get it over with. Hit the guy. Come on, it's fun, right? And the rule for this level is not to make a threat that you cannot carry out. And it goes on to say, if you need to bring a few buddies, do that. I mean, this is the religion of peace. Yep.
The religion of gang.
So, and then of course you have assault. So the 7th degree is to directly hit or kick the person or similar measures that do not involve weapons. This is permissible for private individuals. Guess what the next level involves? Weapons. Good God.
Of course. I mean, if you're gonna threaten someone, you need to be ready to carry it out. So you need to have some weapons.
And a gang of buddies to help you out. So force of arms. Oh my golly. The religion of peace. The religion of peace. Repeat after me. The 8th degree is when one is unable to censure the act by oneself and requires the armed assistance of others. Don't like gays in a nightclub? Well, there's your solution. So sometimes the person being reproved may also get people to assist him, and a skirmish may ensue. So the soundest legal opinion is that this degree requires authorization from the caliph, since it leads to strife and the outbreak of civil discord. Another view, an opposing view, is that there is no need for the caliph's permission.
And of
So
course,
go vigilante, go. Yeah.
And of course, if there is no caliph in your region, then you obviously don't need anyone's permission.
Well, then you are obligated to do it yourself.
Yep.
There are different sections in the Sharia which says if there's no caliph, then it's up to you. So sudden jihad syndrome is real. Yeah.
So Fred has a good question. He says, at what age are people taught this? What age do people start learning this material?
I would think from the age of about 15 onwards. 12, could be 12. I mean, generally they speak of the age of 9 as an age of awareness of a certain, which is not puberty, but it's an age of awareness where you understand the difference between their definition of right and wrong. So they will start learning some of this, but formally speaking, I think from the age of 15, you are a responsible adult. They have a name for it. They call it I can't remember it right now, but I'll get to it sometime. That will come up in the next section next time, where they have a name for it. But this is the person who is morally responsible, and that should be from 15.
And I think that why they aren't formally taught these laws early on, the ideas that they encourage are taught probably from the earliest point a child can speak. That they're taught this idea that Muslims are special and that they shouldn't intermix with other people, and all those other people are evil, and you don't want anything to do with them. They just do evil things all the time.
Yeah. I wonder how they're going to deny all this stuff and say that we've taken it out of context and reading it wrong. I mean, just so that's the end of that. I'll just stop sharing for the moment. If need be, I can go on to some PDFs, but that's the slides that I prepared for today.
All right, so we're just going to open it up for general questions. Anything related to Islam, or you can also ask questions about the Bible if you'd like. Obviously, we may not be able to answer everything. If we don't know the answer to something, we'll just say we don't know. There was some discussion about jokingly, obviously, about wearing a hazmat suit while reading the Quran. I think that, that's the principle behind that is some good advice there, that you don't want to be contaminated by what the Quran teaches.
Yeah, you definitely don't. I mean, the world is contaminated enough by that stuff. Well, maybe I can show something else. Remember those quotes I sent you? Maybe just to
Yeah,
highlight.
why don't you give the people an idea of what we've been working on?
Yeah, that could be interesting. And this is really. So I'm going to zoom in here. Not that one. My bad. Let's go. Not that one. So let me just find those. Not that one. Jeez, I got all the. Okay, I'll just start with this one. What the heck? Here we go. So we've been studying the anti-Christian polemics, anti-biblical polemics of Islamic scholars, and this may be something that you guys really need to know about. So Islam teaches that there are two Jesus figures, two separate and distinct Jesus figures. According to their scholars who have defined the orthodoxy on the subject, the Jesus of the Bible, the Jesus that we know, the Christian Bible, is the satanic Antichrist, if not Satan himself. We created him as a fiction, and we made him as an insult to God. So we made him someone who pooped, urinated, and was created through sex, who then was beaten, spat on, humiliated, bled. And we did this as an insult to God because we deny the true Jesus, the original Messiah, not the true Jesus. Muhammad is the true Jesus. We deny the original Messiah whose job was to foretell the coming of Muhammad. That is Isa, the Islamic Jesus, plagiarized from Gnostic heretical texts that were rejected even 2,000 years ago. So there are two separate Jesus figures. So our Jesus is the Antichrist, if not Satan himself. So anyway, so like all the prophets before him, Jesus confirmed the prophets who had come before him and foretold the coming of the prophet who would come after him, Muhammad. So Jesus followed the way of Islam. It is clear that not only Jesus, but all the prophets, and especially Muhammad, were prophets of Islam, right? So let's continue here.
But before you go on to that, we do have a question.
Sure.
Samuel says that Islam teaches that there's only three different types of people: Muslims, people who pay the jizya, and people who need to be killed. And he says, what specific references support this?
This is in the Sharia. We will actually cover that. So we will actually go. This is in the Sharia. If you read in the Umdat al-Salik, Reliance of the Traveler, section 09.0 onto 09.8, you will actually read. And then if you go to the Hidayah, which is a 4-volume set, you read section 2, volume 2, book 2. You will find about 60 or 70 pages discussing jihad law. So for people of the book, or people who may have had a book that could be regarded as a scripture that was sent down to them, they have the choice of conversion, death, or jizya. For atheists and other groups like Hindus, for instance, they have the choice of death or conversion. So we will cover that in an upcoming show.
I think we touched on it a little in the last 2 episodes, I believe it was, that were over on Sonia's channel.
Yeah. So have a look at this. This is from the Milal wa Nihal, and this is basically a Sirah manual, one of the prophetic biographies of Muhammad. Long before the creation of the world, God, in this case Allah, took a ray of light from the splendor of his own glory and united it to the body of Muhammad. So before creation, does this sound familiar to you? Does this sound like something you may have heard somewhere before? So Allah took a ray of light from the splendor of his own self and united it to the body of Muhammad. And this is called the Nur-i-Muhammadi, or the light of Muhammad. And Allah said, "Thou art the elect, the chosen. I will make the members of thy family the guides to salvation, Muhammad." And then Muhammad said, "The first thing which Allah created was my light and my spirit. And in due time, the world was created, but not until the birth of Muhammad did this ray of glory appear in the world as flesh. It is well known to all Muslims as the Nur-i-Muhammadi, the light of Muhammad. The Nur is said to be of four kinds, blah, blah, blah." Does this sound familiar, Thaddeus?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like they are taking Christian claims about Jesus and attributing them to Muhammad.
Yeah, so
It certainly doesn't sound like anything a Muslim would voluntarily tell us, though. They're always saying that Muhammad's just a man. He's not anything more special than anyone else. So, well, with their words anyway, not with their actions. But
yeah, in fact, yeah, she just mentioned Bukhari 8577, but that quote is also in the Sirah. If you look at Guillaume's Life of Muhammad and others, she says, okay, so Betsy Ross just mentioned, "You should know that the earth belongs to Allah and his apostle," right? That is also a statement made in Guillaume's Life of Muhammad. That's the oldest Sirah, which is Ibn Hisham. Ibn Hisham's recension of Ibn Ishaq's Sirat. Now, he says this to the Jews, and he says, you will submit to me, or I will take your lands, because you Jews should know that the earth belongs to Allah and his apostle." So he is the partner of Allah. Muhammad is the partner, if not Allah himself, but Muhammad is at the very least the partner of Allah in a trinity with the Quran himself and Allah.
so we got a couple questions. First, Goat ate the Quran. He was asking if this passage was from Reliance, and it's not from.
No, here's the book's name.
It's what is the name of the work called?
The Milal wa Nihal, pages 132 to 134.
And then we had a question from Fred. He asked if this programming, meaning the sort of brainwashing that we were talking about of little children, comes into play when a Muslim converts as an adult.
Look, remember, they prefer that you become a Muslim with the least possible knowledge. You just say, you basically go blah, 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 3 times in front of a witness, spin around in a circle, and boom, you're a Muslim. Right? The less you know, the better. Right? And most Muslims who converted leave within 70% of them leave within 2 years, because then eventually they find out what the heck they got themselves into, and they go like, no ways, no thanks. So yeah, but this is the kind of blasphemy that Islam is concealing. They don't want to talk about this. I have asked now, man, I got out of my way to annoy these people. I mean, maybe I could be a better person. I'd hate to think what I'd be like if I weren't Christian, but I got out of my way to annoy people, and they don't want to talk about this. They absolutely don't. And it's crazy. So let's have a look at this one. So what you've got is, and we will do a show on this, and Thaddeus will hopefully speak more, and because we're going through some of the falsified Bible quotes that these people have made up and are teaching Muslims. So Allah created the people of believing men and women from the perspiration of his eyebrows, right? And he made the Muslims of both sexes. And then from the perspiration of his ears, he created the spirits of the Jews and the Christians. And then of the perspiration of his legs, Allah created the earth from the west to the east. And then after this, when the light of Muhammad had praised Allah for 70,000 years, Allah created the light of the prophets out of the light of Muhammad. And he looked upon that light and created their spirits, in other words, the angels. And they said, there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is the apostle of Allah. So the angels said that there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is the apostle of Allah. And then Allah created a lamp of transparent red carnelian and the figure of Muhammad. And he made this figure of Muhammad just as he afterwards was in this world. So Muhammad was made before creation, 100,000 years before creation. And then that figure of Muhammad was put on that lamp, exactly in the form he had when he was saying his prayers. And then the spirits went around the light of Muhammad, praising and worshipping him for 100,000 years. Then Allah commanded the spirits to look upon the form of Muhammad, and they all obeyed. And whoever saw Muhammad's head became a caliph and a sultan among men. Whoever saw Muhammad's forehead became a just commander. Who saw his eyes became one who knows the word of God by heart. And I'll pause there, but if we go to the next page, basically, whoever saw his brain became a Muslim, whoever saw his heart became a greater Muslim, and basically whoever saw the dirt under his feet became Jews and Christians. Let's put it that way.
This is some very shocking material here. I'm sure that most people would have no idea that these kind of claims are made of Muhammad, and yet,
Yeah.
we supposedly are committing blasphemy when we draw a cartoon of Muhammad. But it's perfectly okay to say that he was created 100,000 years before he was born, and that everyone who saw him became a Muslim, and
And who saw the dirt under his feet became Jews and Christians. Basically, that's what it says.
Yeah, I mean, this is some pretty crazy stuff here.
And
I don't know how anyone could believe this material and not view Muhammad as a god.
yeah, no, he is. So Muhammad is Muhammad Jesus. He is Muhammad Jesus. I mean, for instance, I've been asking, so the stories are, and this is mentioned multiple times in the various different sirat. Like in Guillaume, I found this mentioned 3 times in the space of like 2 pages. When Muhammad's mother, Amina, was pregnant with him, she had a light shine out of her private parts. Oh, sorry, and I was wrong. Actually, hold on. Let me bring this up and actually show it to you so we can actually get some perspective on this.
While you're bringing that up,
Sure.
it seems I actually inverted Fred's question. He actually was asking about people who convert out of Islam and how the brainwashing they received as a child affects them as adults.
Oh, I'm not too familiar with people who've converted out, but I mean, I do believe that they breathe a sigh of relief. They feel a sense of great relief that they are out of Islam. They feel, yeah.
I'll just add that I think that, this is one of the things that makes it so hard for someone to leave Islam. It's like, this is, it's one thing if you're raised, say a Christian, for example, and you're considering leaving the religion. That's hard in a sense. But it's just one aspect of your life. Whereas for the Muslim, it's like their entire life, everything that they've known from their birth to whenever they start having doubts is been, your whole life is based on this, for lack of a better term, this brainwashing that you're a great person because you're a Muslim. Yeah, anyone who's not a Muslim is worthless. And now you're doubting whether you believe this is actually true. And it's like, well, your self-worth is, you're thinking about giving up your entire self-worth. Now, once you're actually out, definitely you could be relieved to be on the other side and realize that you've escaped from this horrible situation. It's kind of the same as what would happen in, a classic cult where the leader keeps you in there, and as long as you're in, you can't imagine being outside it. It would be a devastating thought to you to be outside it because you're so brainwashed to be part of this. But then when you actually get out and you actually start thinking clearly, you're completely relieved.
Yeah. Well, one of the great things, and I know this is an interest of yours, is to convert Muslims to Christianity, and that is actually a very, very noble thing for many reasons. But one of the benefits, one of the great things, is that these are people that want to believe, and these are people that become very devout Christians. So there's value in speaking to them and offering them, to change and to accept Christianity.
Yeah. My mom, who's been watching a lot of my videos, made a similar comment. She's like, being raised Christian your whole life, you don't realize how amazing, I mean, you do in some sense, but you don't realize it to the same degree that a convert does about how amazing your situation is. that, you know, when you listen to a convert story, and I featured a few on my channel, that it's just so different than being raised a Christian. That, you know, it's like these people are overjoyed at finally discovering the truth, and being raised in the truth your whole life, you kind of take it for granted.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, so on this, I think if we start to educate our audience and then also start to educate Muslims about what actually is said about Muhammad, I think their leaders don't necessarily tell them everything. I think they imply certain things. But also, it seems that Muslims are really ashamed of discussing these things. They don't want us to know these things. And so I've been writing. I've been very busy in the background. I'm working on a number of projects, and Thaddeus has been contributing as well, because Muslims are literally taught from their youth false Bible verses, and these are part of polemics that were written hundreds of years ago in the 12 and 1300s. And we'll be discussing those as we go forward in the future. But for now, this is something I'm working on called Muhammad, the Seal of the Prophets. And yeah, so just out of interest, if you look at Strong's dictionary, Allah means curse. And this is Taif. I've actually been there in Saudi Arabia. They found a whole bunch of Qurans stuffed into drains. People are giving up on the religion. The police actually went out to investigate this. And yeah, so I've covered some of this in the past, but I just want to cover one or two small things. I want you to look at this. So in the Kitabi Ahwal al-Qiyamat, whatever, we read the following account. It's recorded by tradition that Allah first created a tree with 4,000 branches and called it the Tree of Life, stolen straight out of the Jewish scriptures. Then he created the light of Muhammad in a veil of white pearl of the shape of a peacock and placed it upon that tree, where it praised him for 70,000 years. And then, of course, Allah created the angels, who then praised Muhammad for another 100,000 years. And I've just mentioned this to you, which you've just seen. And who saw his eyeshadow became a singer and a player. Who saw nothing. Those who saw nothing became a Jew, a Christian, an infidel, and a magician.
Lovely.
The blind.
So, you know, there you go. That's why we're not Muslims, is because we didn't see Muhammad's eyeshadow when when he was sitting in the tree of life as a peacock.
Yeah. And Abdurrahman narrates that his mother, Shefa, declared as follows: I was Amina's midwife in the night when labor pain seized her. Muhammad fell into my hands at his birth, and a voice reached my ears from the unseen world saying, Thy Lord show mercy unto thee. And the face of the earth became so illuminated from the east to the west that I could see some of the palaces of Damascus by that light. Now, just so you know, she's in Mecca. Damascus is about 1,300 kilometers away. I measured it. I was wrong last time. I was measuring from Petra. So we will have a look at that in just a moment. So yeah. And so in the Sharia, it actually says that Allah has favored Muhammad above all other prophets and made him the highest of mankind. Allah will reject anyone's attesting to Allah and the Shahada unless they also attest to the Prophet by saying Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. This is not in the Quran. This is nowhere to be found in the Quran. The Shahada that says there's no God but Allah and Muhammad is the messenger of Allah is not in the Quran. Right? And notice it says, Jesus saith unto him, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh unto the Father but by me. So that is John 14, verse 6. This is plagiarized straight out of the New Testament.
So we have a comment that's kind of a question from Maya. She says, sounds like so much of their basic phrases and words used are curses to each other. Not that they all know, I'm sure. I'm sure you mentioned it on the teaching the other night, Lloyd. So is that correct? I guess would be the question.
I didn't quite understand that. Sounds like so much of the basic phrases and words used in the... Oh, no, they curse. No. I said in the last show they are allowed to curse the Christians. It is not mandated, but it is certainly permissible to curse Christians. Because Muhammad's last words, his very last words before he died was, Allah curse the Jews and the Christians, for they built temples to their prophets at the site of their graves. And then the very next thing the Muslims did was they built a mosque at the site of Muhammad's grave, which makes perfect sense because we should be cursed for doing that, but it's okay when they do it. So, yeah. Now, have a look. So Muhammad goes to heaven, right? He has this experience, this vision, or whatever. So there was a man, thin and curly-haired, as though he were one of the men of Shanua. This was Jesus. This is Muhammad speaking. He was standing and praying, and the one who most resembles him is this dude, whoever that guy was. There was also Abraham standing and praying, and the one who resembles him most is Muhammad. So Muhammad resembles Abraham, just by sheer coincidence. And then the time for prayers came, and I, Muhammad, acted as imam for them. So all the prophets were standing in heaven, and Muhammad acted as imam. When we had finished prayers, a voice said to me, "O Muhammad, this is Malik, the chamberlain of hell, so greet him." I turned to him, and he offered me greeting. So even Satan greets him. And then Muhammad's meeting with his Lord. So this is Arthur Jeffrey, Islam, Muhammad, and his religion, okay, page 42. A favorite episode in the account of Muhammad's ascension to heaven is that which tells of the prophet being taken into the presence of Allah. So Jesus had a son's relationship with his father, so this story is intended to show how Muhammad had an equally intimate acquaintance with Allah. And there are many, many versions of the story. So Muhammad actually sees Jesus, right? Many, many times. And I saw Jesus, who was one of average height with a red face as if he had just come out of a bathroom. And I resembled the prophet Abraham more than any of his children. Right, so he meets Jesus in the second heaven, but Muhammad, of course, goes to the seventh heaven. Jesus is only in the second heaven. And yeah, so there's these constant stories about Muhammad that meets Jesus, and Muhammad is superior to Jesus. Like if you look here, I heard a Jew calling out at the top of his voice from the top of a fort in Yathrib, "O company of Jews, tonight has risen a star under which Muhammad is born." So Muhammad is born under a star, right? Let's have a look here. What was said to Amina when she had conceived the apostle? A voice said to Muhammad's mother, "You are pregnant with the Lord of this people. And when he is born, say, call him Muhammad." As she was pregnant with him, she saw a light come forth from her. And according to the scholars and so on, you know where it shone out of, okay? Came forth from her by which she could see the castles of Busra in Syria. Right, by which she could see the castles of Busra in Syria. I'm just going to load this up in Google Maps quickly so we can see this. Okay, so let's have a...
Well, you're pulling that up. Everyone
go.
in the comments is enjoying the thought of a great light coming out of Muhammad's mother as she was giving birth.
Yeah, so this is Mecca. This is Busra in Syria. The distance, as the crow flies, as you drive, it's 1,601 kilometers. As you draw a straight line, it is 1,300 kilometers. So if you look at this line, a light shone out of Muhammad's mother's 1,300 kilometers. And it lit up the castles. It lit up the castles in Busra in Syria, and she could see the castles from there.
Yeah,
this is the device that apparently caused the effect.
Obviously, it would take some research to determine this for real, but I feel like intuitively a light that bright would destroy anything in the vicinity of it.
Yeah, and I mean, they mentioned it. They said they mentioned it like 3 times in 2 pages. She told how she was pregnant with him. A light went out from her which illuminated the castles of Busra in Syria. And she had borne Muhammad with the least difficulty imaginable. When she bore him, he put his hands on the ground like this and lifting his head towards the heavens. So he was doing yoga the time he was born. So, and Muhammad then said, "I am what Abraham, my father, prayed for, and I am the good news of my brother Jesus." So
before you scroll down, I did appreciate the authentic skin color of that picture of Muhammad there, because we know he was extremely white.
Yeah, so this is the young Muhammad. He was just born, doing the cobra pose or whatever you call that one. So look, this is So Muslims. So I'm busy working on this. I'm finding most of this research was actually done between 1850 and 1890, and there's a number of scholars that I found. I found a number of books that I've been reading and taking notes out of, and these are all in Sirah manuals that many of them have not been translated. But I think for many good reasons, Muslims don't want us to know about these books. They don't want us discussing this because they believe Muhammad is a god. They believe Muhammad is Jesus.
Yeah, even if they don't consciously say that Muhammad is a god, the beliefs clearly support that view.
Yeah, I mean, in this case, Muhammad feeds 1,000 people. Okay, I'm just going to maximize this because, sorry, the fonts are there for me to read. I'll just maximize it so you guys can see it as well. I'll make it size 28. Hopefully you can read this now. I'll make it even larger so you guys can try to read this. 36. Muhammad feeds 1,000 people with a single lamb. And he makes a rock turn to sand. So he hits this rock. Apparently they're all starving. It's a real sob story. He takes up a spade, he strikes this rock, and the rock turns into sand. And then his wife, this guy's wife, has a small quantity of barley and a single lamb. She slaughters the lamb. Muhammad spits into the pots. And that lamb then feeds 1,000 people. And he continued to break up the meat and break up the bread and put meat in it till all 1,000 people had eaten to their fill, and still some of the food remained. Eat from it and send it as a present for the people who have been afflicted with severe hunger. So Muhammad made a single small lamb. Apparently they emphasize it's a tiny little lamb, feed 1,000 people. Again, where's this story plagiarized from? You know, she thought the food would not be enough for everyone, but how can very little food cater for 1,000 people? And yeah, so Muhammad spat into the cooking pot. These are stories constantly of Muhammad, and they speak numerous times of supposed Christian monks, Christian priests, that when they see Muhammad for the first time go, "You are the one that he's prophesied, you are the one we've been waiting for. None other than a prophet is sitting beneath that tree." And this guy, oddly enough, is called Nestor, and I mean, one just goes Nestorian, heretic. So yeah, I don't know, any comments, any thought? I don't want to go too far. I mean, this is stuff I'm still busy working on. But they basically imply that Muhammad is Muhammad Jesus.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of good material to serve as an introduction there. There was a comment a little while ago, it scrolled past, I don't know who said it, but someone said that reading these Islamic sources would be good inspiration for any comic book writer. And I think that's very true.
Yeah, I mean, so how do we use this? I mean, whenever I ask Muslims about this, they're like, they want to talk to me about this. They don't want to say a word about it. I mean, you know what's going to happen soon? They're just going to start denying it.
Let's see. Now, everyone really seemed to enjoy that material quite a bit. There's a lot of banter on it, so that's good. A good preview for what's coming up. I think we're going to call that something like the Muhammad you never knew, or the Muhammad no Muslim wants you to know about, maybe.
Probably,
Something
yeah.
like that. So we do
Yeah.
have a couple questions from our perennial troll, Sayed F11.
Because he just showed up.
Yes.
How can you trust a father who sent his son to his death? What a twit.
And to answer that comment, we would have to say, well, in the Christian doctrine, you know, that Jesus is God, so he is sending himself. And, you know, it's just a total botchering of Christian doctrine. The question itself doesn't really even make any sense. It's not something any Christian would say. No one would say, oh, God the Father sent Jesus to die. No.
Yeah. I would like to come on the show via Skype. Oh my God.
Well, you know, we're not on Skype, so that's problem number one. And problem number two is you have repeatedly shown yourself to not be interested in honest dialogue. So I have no interest in inviting a liar on my show who's just going to complain when I point out his lies and complain about not being let speak like you always do when they're trying to point out that your point doesn't make any sense in Speaker's Corner.
Yeah. I mean, maybe he can explain to us how Muhammad was around 100,000 years, 170,000 years before he was born. He was the first thing created by Allah. The angels worshipped him for 100,000 years. All of the prophets were created out of the light of Muhammad. And he's basically a carbon copy parody of Jesus. Maybe he wants to explain that to us. And this light that shone 1,300 kilometers from Muhammad, obviously, from his mom to Busra in Syria, which lit up the castles 1,300 kilometers away. Maybe who saw that light?
Good
Do we have
question.
witnesses? And besides, well, what's the elevation between those two? Are there mountains in the way?
Yeah, is it even physically possible? That's a good question.
How you see 1,300 kilometers? So Syed, please tell me, this light that shone 1,300 kilometers, was Muhammad's mom indoors lying down? Was she wearing a skirt or a dress at the time? How did the light get out? These are, come on, man, this is your scriptures.
He says he can't answer our claims because the Quran doesn't contain such info. So let's look at the implication of what you're saying. So are you saying that the Muslim authors who wrote these things were lying? And if so, then why do you believe they're honestly passing on the Quran to you?
Yeah, so are they lying? Let's answer that first. So all these Sirah authors lying? All these Hadith authors lying?
And we're not going to answer any of your other questions until you answer that question. So are these authors lying? While we're waiting to see if he actually addresses that.
He doesn't want to. He's doing his polemics.
Yeah, well, there is a delay of 20 or 30 seconds, so we'll give him a chance. We'll see. But what I found interesting is we've been working through some. These days Muslims only have a dozen or so biblical passages that they try to turn to find Muhammad. We've been looking at an older work that has, what was it, like about 50 or so claimed quotes?
Yeah.
And it's very enlightening. Let's just put it that way. Some of them appear to be entirely made up. They're so distorted that he either made them up himself or they're so distorted from the Bible we can't even tell what passage he supposedly was quoting. And then a lot of others, he'll find like the word camel in some passage and he'll be like, this refers to Muhammad. And then he'll sort of quote the actual passage, but then he'll throw in other Islamic words into it that aren't there in the original.
I mean, since we're talking about that book, maybe I should bring that up and just show something out of it. What do you think?
Yeah, go ahead. Just to give an idea of what we're working on.
So yeah, I just grabbed the random page. Let me just find where the share button is. Where do I share again? Okay, here we go. That one. So this is something that I think Muslims avoid, and Syed is avoiding it. And look, I got on my way to annoy these people, right? So I mean, I am persistent like crazy. So for instance, so with his envoyship, the hand of the people of Ishmael became above all, right? Supremacy here. So no dominion on earth was mightier than theirs, where they conquered the kingdoms of Persia, the Turks, Byzantium, and others. They conquered the Jews, the Nazarenes, the Magians, the Sabians, the idolaters. So they're talking just about them. All they are conquering, not the religion of peace, right? And then for the disclaimers of the truth, that's us. This would be as if God had said, you will give birth to a tyrannous, oppressive despot who will subjugate the people with falsehood, right? Massacre the servants of God, lead their women into captivity, pilfer their fortunes, alter the religions of the prophets, lie to God and the like. So this is what we are supposedly claiming about Muhammad. So we are saying that, so Muhammad is a true prophet. So, how could God make someone who would be tyrannous, oppressive, subjugate people with falsehood, massacre the followers of God, lead their women into captivity, pilfer their fortunes, and alter the religions of the prophets, lie to God? And Muhammad did all these things. And now they're trying to say, well, a true prophet wouldn't do that. Muhammad is obviously a true prophet, right? And so they speak of the sayings of David in the book of Psalms, and apparently all of that applies to Muhammad and his people. They are the people who glorify God with loud voices, calling to prayer 5 times a day from the high places. So that's them, right? So the phrase in there, so the other speaker, the phrase in their hands, swords with 2 blades, refers to the Arab swords the companions used in conquering the lands. Up to the present time, these 2 blades are attributed to the Arabs. Here they speak very clearly. This is Ibn Qayyim, student of Ibn Taymiyyah, speaks of Muslims conquering, right? And so here they say the Jews call upon the people to gather by blowing the horn, the Nazarenes by ringing the bells, but the Muslims have 2 swords in their hands. What does that tell you about the violent nature of Islam and Islamic mission? So his Sharia is the one compared to the state of reverence. Either accept the belief or pay the jizya, or else the sword. And this comes in agreement with his saying, peace be upon him, I was given triumph by instilling fear the length of 1 month's journey. And the Prophet David recounted that Muhammad will come with laws and the rules, the Sharia. So the saying of David in another psalm, so the lauded wreath is Muhammad, right? He will gain control from one sea to the other, and the nations will yield to him in obedience and submission. So now notice they say Muhammad rescued weak from the tyrant, and this is different from the way of the Messiah, who did not reach a similar influence during his lifetime, nor did his followers after his ascension to heaven. Muhammad was greater than them, right? And they speak here of they either embraced Islam or they paid the jizya feeling humbled. God will send Muhammad. So these are some of the news about the Messiah and Muhammad long before they were born. It means that God will send Muhammad to teach the people that the Messiah is a man, not a God, that he's the son of a human being and not the son of the creator of human beings. So they mention the prophecy of Isaiah. Now, what happens in this book is that they never give a Bible citation. They never tell you. They tell you the book it's in, never the citation. If you look, some of these verses don't exist. Some of them are a mishmash of 3 or 4 verses. So in the prophecy of Isaiah, I see 2 coming riders, one on a donkey and one on a camel. The donkey rider is, as in the Nazarenes' belief, the Messiah, and the camel rider is Muhammad. Muhammad is more known of a camel rider than the Messiah, who is more known of a donkey rider. With Muhammad, the idols of Babylon fell down, and not with the Messiah. It just goes on and on like this. And let me actually get to the one favorite passage. Let's go to this. So they speak of the Christians here. These are the people who denied the prophethood of Muhammad and the seal of the prophets. As you know, what the seal of the prophets looks like. So the Lord's Prayer, our Father who art in heaven, ridicules God. So the Christians chose a way of prayer during which the most devoted and ascetic amongst them would consider it no great matter if he happened to pass urine dripping on his thighs and legs. And it says here, what God entered the vagina of a woman who eats, drinks, urinates, evacuates her bowels, and menstruates? Well, Muhammad, apparently. And then he dwelled there for 9 months, wobbling between excrement, urine, and menstrual blood. Right? This is in reference to Jesus. And then they say, right?
And every other person who's ever been born, I might add.
Yeah, exactly. Right? Now, notice they say the Christian sects do not consider this a religious duty, cleanliness, in other words, and that there is nothing impure in getting off the abdomen of a woman, urinating, emptying the bowel without having a bath, or cleaning the anus while urine and excrement would be dripping on the legs and thighs. So apparently, we have no problem just getting off the toilet while urine and excrement are dripping on our legs and our thighs, and then we go and pray. And then our prayer is considered acceptable and complete. And even if one of them empties the bowel and urinates, he may as well break wind and fart while praying. They say that the prayer with major impurity, with urine and excrement, is better. That's what Christians say, is better than the prayer with cleanliness, because Muslims clean themselves before and after praying. So we pray with urine and excrement, and such a prayer is more of a ridicule than a prayer. Okay, so they say that we would pray, and there's a different passage in a different book that says that, in fact, when we pray in church, we would be happy to simply just urinate on the pew and we just continue praying. We would literally take a leak on the church bench. This is what Islam teaches Muslims about Christianity.
Absolutely ridiculous. I mean, can you imagine a Christian saying, this is what Muslims do? I mean, come on now. We wouldn't stoop that low. We would not make such ridiculous claims about Muslims.
Yeah, if a dog comes close to the walls, it may happen that the dog may urinate on these pictures. They speak of, they worship handmade pictures drawn on the walls and painted with different colors. And if a dog comes, it may urinate on these pictures. Yet the makers of these pictures, that's us, would still venerate them, kneel and humble themselves. Right? So who can tolerate the mischievous deeds of these people at all levels? If one can hold back from fighting them, their blasphemies are intolerable, and would they pose more than enough a cause and a duty to fight us as one would get rid of a brute animal, harmful and wicked by nature. And notice they say here, so we would not pay attention to prayers, we would talk about wine and pork, and then we would urinate in our seat if we can at church. We would literally take a pee in our seat.
It's ridiculous.
This is Orthodox Islam.
Ridiculous. So, as anticipated, Saeed did not give us any answer, which is fine. I'll just repeat, there are only three logical possibilities here, basically. Either the Islamic authors of these texts that claim that Muhammad was the first thing created and made 170,000 years before he was born, and whatnot, and that light was coming out of his mother's private parts as she gave birth, and all these things. So the authors who made these, there's only three possibilities. One, they just made it up, in which case they're liars. Possibility number two is that they didn't make it up themselves, but they didn't bother to check where it was true or not, and they just passed it on. If either of those are true, these are the same scholars that were transmitting the Quran to you. So you have no reason to believe they accurately transmitted the Quran. They could have inserted their own fake verses into it. They could have received an altered copy and not cared because they didn't bother to check whether it was legitimate or not. And then, of course, the third possibility is that they are actually teaching what Islam taught, in which case then you got some answering to do about how Islam is treating Muhammad as a god.
Yeah.
So
he doesn't want to answer. He doesn't want to answer. For instance, tell us about this light that shone 1,300 kilometers out of Muhammad's mom's private parts to Busra in Syria and shone on the walls of the castle, and they could see it. And she could see the castle. Tell us about that. Tell us how Muhammad was created 170,000 years before the earth was created. Tell us more about that, Syed.
We do have a legitimate question.
Yep.
Probably someone who came in late. They're asking about what source we're referring to.
In this case, okay, so these are multiple books that I'm using. So this was I just read from the Guidance to the Uncertain. It goes under different names, but you will find it under this name. There's multiple different names for these titles. This is by Ibn Qayyim. He was a student of Ibn Taymiyyah, and he forms a trinity with a guy called Ibn Hazm, who originated the major anti-Christian polemics in Islam. So these are the big three, basically. There's a handful of them. And they pretty much of a muchness. They're pretty much the same.
And the stories about Muhammad's miraculous
those are from
birth.
various versions of the Sirah. There are multiple, just like there are many Hadith volumes, there are many Sirah volumes. Now, there was a time when the Sirah were preeminent over the Hadith. They came before the Hadith and then the Sirah. In fact, look at some of the modern Sirah. I mean, they just bear no resemblance to the old ones. The ones written in this century are just a joke.
Actually, that's a really important point, that the Sirah came first. So this material theoretically is more reliable than the Hadith.
Yeah.
So you definitely have some answering to do. So it's not just the Quran, it's also the Hadith, obviously, that are also in doubt. Because, I mean, if these people who wrote before the Hadith were collected were making stuff up, then you have no reason to believe that the Hadith are legitimate.
Yeah,
and
true.
You have no reason to believe the Quran's legitimate. So we did have a good comment from Fred earlier that asked if Ibn Qayyim had found Muhammad in Matthew 7:15. I'm going to pull that up here.
You got the document, right? Yeah.
Oh, well, I have Matthew 7:15 that I'm going to show here.
I was going to see if he mentioned Matthew, if he mentioned
Oh,
it.
he won't. You'll see.
Yeah, Matthew. They mentioned Matthew. Let's have a look.
So this is Matthew 7:15 through 20. Beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. You will recognize them by their fruits. Are grapes gathered from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? So every healthy tree bears good fruit, but the diseased tree bears bad fruit. A healthy tree cannot bear bad fruit, nor can a diseased tree bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into fire. Thus you will recognize them by their fruits. And I think this is probably about as close as you can get to a legitimate prophecy of Muhammad in the Bible. That the fruits of Muhammad are pretty clear. It's waging war, encouraging people to lie to promote their religion, uh, marrying and having sex with young girls, just about every heinous crime you could think of, torturing people to reveal their hidden treasures, all kinds of fun stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. What's interesting is in this book that we were just discussing now, Ibn Qayyim writes that Mark wrote the gospel in Hebrew. This is one of the greatest scholars of Islam. Now, why doesn't Syed want to tell us, Syed, were your scholars lying or were they wrong? Tell us. Are these all false?
Yeah, I mean, I think that he sees the implication. He can't, there is no good answer, but he needs to actually think about it, not just avoid answering it, because all three possibilities are pretty bad for Islam. You know,
Yeah,
either they're liars or they're careless, or this is really what Islam teaches. Those are your only three possibilities.
yeah. Tell us, Syed, why did Ibn Qayyim say that Mark wrote the gospel in Hebrew? I mean, we all know it was not written in Hebrew. It's more likely to have been written in Chinese than in Hebrew. So please explain. So he won't answer. He can't answer. I mean, they know they're wrong. They simply won't. They know they're wrong. So they realize. So they just refuse to answer. It's just how it is. Um, which is a pity. They can't be honest.
So Joey Brown asks, what do you mean there are different Sira volumes? And there are multiple, Sira basically just means biography. So there are multiple different biographies written by different people.
Yeah, and the older they get, the more accurate they become. The most recent ones, if you look at the ones written in the 2000s, the late 90s and the 2000s, they're garbage. They are so sanitized. In fact, these are the ones that start to really soften the whole thing. They take out all the violence, all the political maneuvers, these warfare, invasions. They start to they start to write this fairy tale of this peaceful man, right? But the older ones, if you look, they're the ones that deify. So the ones that I'm looking at now, that I'm trying to track down, are these older ones that really go through. So I found a few of them, and they deify Muhammad. They make him into Muhammad Jesus. He is the partner of God, quite literally the partner of God. And he's worshipped by the angels. So if he's not God, how is he worshipped by the angels?
It's a good question.
And let me just show this. I mean, for instance, Ibn Qayyim states here, right? Ibn Qayyim states very bluntly, Mark wrote his gospel, good grief, in Hebrew. This is Ibn Qayyim in his book. Mark wrote his gospel in Hebrew, right? So someone explain. This is the extent of their scholarship, and you've got to find, they quote Bible verses that do not exist. He quotes Bible verses that don't exist. There is no such Bible verse. So how is he quoting the Bible when those verses do not exist? They cannot be found. So he's making it up, and he was fooling people, and people didn't know any better. They didn't know the Bible back then, 900 years ago. He won't answer. He won't answer about the inaccuracy of these scholars. I mean, are these Sirah all false? Say yes or no. Say yes or no. Are they accurate or are they false? No, they can't do that. So yeah, so that's it from me. I mean, I think we've covered a lot. So
Mhm.
I've introduced the idea of jihad, but I think I've introduced it in a social, cultural context which people are not familiar with. So not just in the concept of warfare, but actually, which shows that Islam indoctrinates their people with violence from an early age.
Yes. We do have a question about where we can get copies of the Sirah.
So one of the best places to start. Look, I'm busy making a collection right now. I've managed to build up quite a good collection of Sharia manuals. I've only like the last month or so started to look into the Sirah in more depth. I don't have many. I'm trying to find older ones that were written in the 1800s, basically. That's when the scholarship into them really became a thing. So from say the 1830s, especially the 1850s to 1890s, that's when the scholarship into this really became a thing by major international scholars from UK and Germany, especially. And I'm busy building these, but your best source to look for them is archive.org. Look on archive.org, archive.org, and you will find some other ones, but they won't tell us what the names are. I mean, it's tracking them down is not always that easy, believe me. The other one is kalamullah.com, kalamullah.com. Kalamullah.com has a host of books as well. So I would suggest you start with archive.org. Look for PDFs there that that are very Sirah of Muhammad. So do a Google search, find out what are the names of the Sirah. Sometimes you don't find the actual book. What you'll find is a commentary on the book. So you go find a scholarly commentary, especially from the late 1800s. You find the scholarly commentary, and they will quote large extracts from the book and discuss it. So that's sometimes the closest you'll get. Many of them have not been translated in full, or they've been forgotten. So it's not easy to track them down. But I will make links. Look, I will make links. I'll add them in the comments or put them in the description of the ones that I do have, and you can download the ones that I do have. Make sure you see how many I have right now. So, I mean, was this shocking to people? Was this?
Yeah, I think.
Oh man, I
I
have
think.
I
Sorry.
have 22 Sirat manuals,
There you go. We got at least 22 different series.
and that's not all of them. There's probably like 50.
Yeah, I think that the material on jihad was a very good introduction to that subject. I think it was very informative. It um, doesn't leave much doubt about what Islam has classically taught that jihad is, and it's not just struggling for your faith. I mean, yes, that's the literal translation of the word, but obviously it entails a lot more than just that. And then the introduction to the um, divine Muhammad was very well received. A lot of people, everyone found that material to be quite shocking, uh, also entertaining. There's a lot of discussion on that. So I think that did a good job of whetting people's appetite for that. And then we want to thank Saeed for coming in and once again making a mockery of Islam by showing that you are unable to answer simple questions because you know that every possible answer will undermine Islam.
Yeah, I mean, why are these scholars writing lies? I mean, if it's truthful, then say yes, those are true. And if it's false, then I mean, why are these scholars lying about Muhammad? Is a major sin in Islam. So why are major scholars? These are not nobodies. These are like this is like Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John lying about Jesus. It's like you get caught lying, it's a bad thing. So I think we need to start putting this out there and start to ask people. Look, I mean, how many people saw this light that shone 1,300 kilometers to Syria from Mecca? You know, out of this woman's skirts. Please tell us more. You know, it's a great miracle. Can we hear more, please? Tell us. I'm interested. I want to know more about this Islam thing. But somehow they never answer.
I
You
think
know?
that's a good point to end it on. We want you to take this material and use it, share it with Muslims that you talk to. Feel free to do anything you like with my videos. You can chop them up, take out just a portion, upload it to your own channel, whatever you want to do with it. The important thing here is to get the message out to reach Muslims and educate Christians.
Yeah, and educate
We
Muslims as well.
have a question that I think we'll end it with. It says, Islam is spreading so fast because most people are ignorant. I agree with that. It's definitely not spreading through good knowledge or anything like that. Basically, no one would accept Islam if they
So,
understood
so
it
this
properly.
question has been asked and answered. Mainstream knowledge is considered when 10% of the population, of a given population, considers something to be true. So, in other words, if you can inform 10% of your circle about what you know, and everyone just works 10% of your soccer club, 10% of your colleagues, 10% of your friends, 10% of your family. Once 10% of a population knows something and accepts it, it is then considered mainstream. It is considered true for the community. You don't have to convince everyone, just a small handful, 1 in 10. Tell people, and when people start to realize and learn what this crap actually is, they will go, I mean, it's disgusting. They won't need much convincing to just react negatively to it. And Muslims have to lie about it, and they're often aware that they're lying about it, because we would never accept this if we knew the truth about it. That's why they have to lie about it. So these are their own books. I'm not making it up. I'm reading it. You're seeing it on the screen. I'm reading it from their own books, from their own scholars. That's it.
Absolutely. When Jesus died and resurrected, the Christian religion started with 11 faithful disciples, and it has now spread to the whole world. So, just doing a little, it can be easy to look and see, there's a billion Muslims. How can we possibly reach a billion people? And one person certainly can't, but, we each can reach one person. And if every Christian reached one person, then, the entire earth would be Christian in a couple of generations.
Yeah. Now, Syed is saying it is a major sin to punish an innocent instead of the real sinners. Then why at the end times is Allah going to, and Muhammad going to take the sin off the Muslims and place them on the backs of the Jews and Christians? We don't care that you don't believe in the hadith. The other 99% of Muslims do. So what are you going to do about that? Are you letting them know that they are all apostates? Are you letting them know that they're all believing falsehoods? Because then the 99% of Muslims are all believing the wrong thing.
I mean, that's a good point. If he was serious about his claims, then he should be trying to reach Muslims,
Yeah,
because they would be a lot more receptive to his message than we
yeah,
would be. And, if 99% of Muslims are on the wrong path, I think he should be saying something to them.
yeah. Yeah, so if you have the right Islam and the other 99% are all wrong, don't tell us that the hadith are false. Go tell your friends. Go tell the guys at Speaker's Corner, get in a box at Speaker's Corner and tell those Muslims that are your friends that they are believing in falsehoods in the hadith, please. DCCI would love to form you, I'm sure. Now, he ignores this. You see, he ignores all this and he starts talking about all sorts of nonsense.
Yep.
So yeah, that's it from me. I hope this was helpful. Please share this knowledge, speak about it, talk about it. It's in their books. I will provide all the links. I provided dozens and dozens of book links in this series so far. All the PDFs I've spoken about have been available for download. I'll make the same here.
Excellent. Yep. So look for those links. We'll post those very shortly. Take this material, use it, talk to people, talk to your friends, whether they're Christian, Muslim, whatever. Get this information out there. Everyone needs to make an effort to spread the material. I don't care if you refer people to my channel or not, but I do want you to share the material.
Yeah, get it out there. Talk to people. Ask Muslims uncomfortable questions. Ask them about Muhammad being created 100, angels worshiping him for 100,000 years. Do they know about it? Can you tell them more?
All right. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, whatever time of day is, wherever you are, and have a great rest of your day.
All right. Cheers, guys. Good night.